Welcome, everybody. We're going to give it just like one more second while everybody joins the room, while I get everything set in the backstage. And then we'll give it a go. Everybody appears to be ready. That is great news as we kick things off on this Thursday. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Jay Rosenthal. I'm the co-founder and managing director of Cultivated Media, and I'll be the host and tech support and a little bit of production on the back end. So everybody, welcome on behalf of the Cultivated Media team. I'm happy to have partnered with our friends at Modern Advocacy and Hodgson Russ on this webinar, which is called Expert Insights on New York's Cannabis Licensing Deals. It's the second. We may have more as we go, as things keep changing. And we're happy to partner with them, not only because they are great people, but also because New York is a dynamic, new, and rapidly changing market. And we love to host experts on Cultivated to share their insight, and that's why we're here today. But first, little shameless self-promotion. I want to tell you a little bit about me and Cultivated. I'm Jay, the co-founder of Cultivated Media, and since we launched in 2023, our goal has been to be cannabis industry first, providing you with the most important, insightful, useful, and timely information. We do that through our daily newsletter, which is called Cultivated Daily. We do that through our Cultivated live streams, and we do it through programs like this event. So while you're here today, I'd love if you head over to cultivated.news and subscribe to our newsletter, but also follow us on LinkedIn, which many of you obviously already do. And if you want a look at some of the most compelling industry content on the internet, head to our YouTube page. I'll put links up to all these things as the program moves forward. And you should know that this program is being recorded today and will be available forever, I guess, on LinkedIn and YouTube. And because it's going to be chock full of information, and we want to chock as much full into this 45 minutes or an hour, we're actually not going to be taking questions today, but I'm going to put all the contact information for everybody speaking today in the chat on LinkedIn. So please feel free to contact them directly. And with that, it's enough from me. So let me tell you what we have coming up during the program. So obviously I'm giving a welcome and program overview, but first up, we're going to welcome Joe Rossi with Modern Advocacy. He'll be providing a state of play for New York cannabis right now. Then we'll bring up Danielle Holmes and Patricia Heer from Hodgson Russ for a segment on regulatory considerations and requirements. And finally, Ben Farber from Hodgson Russ for a segment on corporate transactional issues. We will try to keep this tight, and it will be jam-packed, I assure you, as you can see from the program. With that, it's my pleasure to welcome up Joe Rossi, the founder and president of Modern Advocacy, for an update and state of play on New York cannabis. Modern Advocacy is a professional services firm specializing in business development, government affairs, and political consulting that can quickly adapt to the evolving political landscape in New York and beyond. He's been on the leading edge of the cannabis industry policy in New York for a long time, and we're excited to have him here today again and to partner with him again on this webinar. Joe, I'm going to bring you up right now. Hold on one sec. And there you got a presentation. I'll be right back. Thanks, Joe.
Hey, Jay, thank you so much for hosting this. And I encourage everyone to sign up for his daily newsletter. He's doing a tremendous job nationally, internationally, covering all the news going on. And thank you for focusing on New York. I'm going to go as quick as I can to get to the more important people, Patricia Heer and Danielle Holmes, that were just terrific public servants at the Office of Cannabis Management and are now at Hodgson Russ and providing tremendous value to their clients. The current status of New York State cannabis industry, about a year ago, I was one of the whistleblowers, kind of criticizing where the legal cannabis program was then. But a year later, the program's headed on the right track. New York's legal cannabis industry surpassed $1 billion in retail sales last year with 300 stores. Which was very encouraging. About half of those stores are in downstate New York City, and the rest are scattered across upstate New York. Over 50% of licenses awarded have been awarded to social and economic equity applicants, with strong representation from minority and women-owned businesses, which is the intent of the law, which is the pursuit of the law. And we're happy to see that. Again, there's 300 licensed dispensaries operating, and it's projected that it'll exceed 500 by the end of this year. I'd like to think it'll be even more at the rate they're going, and which is boosting consumer access, but it's also helping local economies with the tax and the reinvestment fund associated with it. Last year, hundreds of illegal dispensaries have been shut down, which protects consumers and licensed businesses from the illicit market. Operation Padlock was definitely a success. Municipalities are also drafting laws based on authority designated to them by the OCM for shutting down unlicensed businesses on their own. And just to point out, there is tremendous public servants still at the OCM that have just really bridged the divide from the beginning of this program to where it is now. And, thank you to all of them for all their hard work. It's projected there will be 1.5 billion in sales for 2025, indicating strong market expansion and increasing consumer adoption. New York's cannabis industry is booming with ongoing economic impact, social equity efforts, and enforcement ensuring long-term prosperity and innovation. However, there are still hundreds of retail licenses that have been issued but have not become operational yet. So, I know I just painted a very rosy picture, and it's because we all need to in New York to help promote and expand the New York program. We've come a long way from last year, and just want to thank you, Jay, again for hosting us. And here comes the smarter people with the information that I think everyone's interested in knowing.
That's the way I always feel, Joe, that the smarter people are coming up behind me. But I appreciate, thank you for that today. I'm going to take you off, but thank you for being here. And it is now, let me just, here we go. There we go. That's a little bit better. Next, we're going to welcome up Patricia Heer and Danielle Holmes, who are both partners at Hodgson Russ. Patricia's experience spans across the private and public sector. Prior to joining Hodgson Russ, she was interim general counsel and first deputy general counsel with the New York State Office of Cannabis Management, where she advised the agency and its board on the cannabis law, regulations, and litigation against the agency. This is her second webinar with us, where she's been with Cultivated. So thank you, Patricia, for joining us here today. And joining Patricia is Danielle Holmes. She is a partner at Hodgson Russ, Cannabis and Hemp and Administrative and Regulatory and Municipal Litigation Practices. And she has over a decade of experience counseling clients in highly regulated industries, including the cannabis and gaming sectors, before joining Hodgson Russ. And upon the passage of New York's MRTA, Danielle was appointed as one of the founding executive staff members for the state's Office of Cannabis Management, where she was tasked with overseeing the licensing division. As deputy director for licensing, Danielle played the pivotal role of creating the office's licensing team and launching and issuing the first adult use cannabis licenses and applications. These two, as Joe said, are the people you want to hear from today. And Danielle, I just learned, grew up down the street from where I grew up. So that's near and dear to my heart. So Patricia and Danielle, I'm going to bring you up. I'm going to put the presentation on stage, and you can take it away. Thanks both.
Thank you so much, Jay. And before we get started, I, of course, want to make clear that none of the obstacles and challenges that the agency faced from the start were attributed in any part to the great work of Danielle or myself. So, and of course, I'm sure Joe would agree with that. So, of course, a shameless plug for us. But Danielle, why don't you start us off on some of the regulatory considerations that we want sellers and buyers of businesses that hold a cannabis license to keep in mind?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Jay, again, for the intro. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the only way to really enter the New York State market right now for legal cannabis is to purchase a license, essentially. The application portal's closed. So this is your only real entrance into the market. And there's a whole lot of considerations that need to happen before you make this leap or while you're making this leap. Focusing primarily on our retail side, because that seems to be where the most people are looking to get in. Your two options for a retail license are a micro business that also includes retail, or just a straight up retail dispensary license. So you really need to consider what type of license you're going for. The micro business is vertically integrated. So if you have land and you have space where you also want to cultivate and process and distribute, the micro business might be the best choice for you. you have to remember be very careful when you're looking into purchasing a micro business to see what activities the license is approved for. Some people applied for a micro business without retail or without processing. They all have cultivation, but the other options were optional. So if you're looking to do a micro business with retail and you're looking to purchase a micro business that does not have approval for retail, you're going to need to submit amendments to the office for that license in order to get that approval. And also keep in mind, if you do have land and you're thinking micro business is the place to go, there are restrictions on how far away from your growing site you can locate your retail dispensary. And then if you buy if you're looking for a straight up retail dispensary license, just remember you cannot have any interest in any of the supply side tiers. So you can't have interest in a cultivator, a processor, a distributor. If you're a retail dispensary, you're only allowed to be a retail dispensary. Next slide, Jay. So your second consideration after deciding what type of license you're looking at purchasing is going to be if you're looking at a C or a non-C license. The C license are social, economic, and equity licenses, and certain licenses that have been approved have that qualifying C component, and other ones had applied and been approved without being a C license. So if you fit the criteria as a C applicant, there may be space for you to step in the shoes of a seller C applicant and fill that criteria and maintain that C qualification. If you don't meet that criteria and you're looking to purchase a license that has a C qualification, there may be a pathway to drop the C approval and qualification that might increase your costs that need to be paid to hold that license. But there's not yet been a lot of guidance issued from the office on the ability of people to do this. There's nothing put out yet saying if the C qualification can be transferable or if you can drop your C qualification. So we're really waiting for more guidance on what that process will be from the office, but it's definitely something to keep in mind as you look for a license to purchase, or if you're selling a license, on how that might impact your purchasers. Next slide. And then another consideration is also obviously if your license is just an application, or if it has a provisional approval, or if it's a final license. Those are three very different steps in the process of licensing. If it's in an application phase, it hasn't had any approvals by the office yet. It would still be fairly unclear on if it would get approval or not. If it's a provisional license, it already has provisional approval by the office, but it likely means that there's no location that's been approved by the office yet. So you'll see a lot of retail licenses that are in provisional status where the location they submitted to the office did not work out, and they need to find another location. So it's really important to keep that approval in mind. If you're looking at a final license for a retail dispensary or micro, it means that their location's already approved. There's already been a final license issued for that location. You can always submit a request to relocate if you're not happy with the location that final license is granted to. But again, it's part of the considerations in the process. And then if you're provisional looking to purchase into, the shares of an entity that holds a provisional license, you would want to find out if they have proximity protection at a location yet or not, or if they're not tied to any location, or, where on that process this license application is falling, because that's going to make a difference in your steps moving forward. Next slide.
Danielle, you mentioned you were talking about a provisional license versus a final license. And before we talk about provisional timing, if I'm thinking of buying a cannabis business, how can I easily tell whether a business is provisionally approved or approved on a final basis?
So if it's approved on a final basis, It would be in the board resolutions. It would have a final license number. A provisional license isn't going to have a final license number. A final license should appear on the local map. If it has a retail component anyways, it should appear on the local map. So that's one thing you want to check out with the location. There's also open data sources out there that are information cultivated by the office that you can find on their website and the local map website, where you can look up license information, and it should tell you what status that license is in.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And so there's a provisional period, and then you become a final licensee and an operating business. And so for provisional timing, I would imagine folks would want to keep in mind the amount of time that there's left before they have to, under the regulatory scheme, to become finally approved and operational, right? And we know that timing period has been extended for cards for conditional adult use retail dispensaries by board resolution. If you look at the list of resolutions, they're under the board meetings. And so it'll be interesting to see whether the provisional period, the 12-month provisional period, will also be extended for the adult use retail dispensary licenses, and what is that going to look like? Is it going to be a wholesale approval? Will it be issued only upon request? Will it be issued only for those that became provisionally approved by a certain date, maybe if they were impacted by the injunction? So it will. That's yet to be seen. I'll turn it back over to you and to the next slide.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important as well. If you're looking at purchasing into a provisional license that only has, 2 months left before that 1 year is up, there would be a lot that would need to happen within that 2 months to get a final license. And in that consideration, you also want to find out, and you would have to find this out. The easiest way would be through the seller on if that license already has board approval or not. If it got board approval to get to the provisional stage, it shouldn't need board approval again for the final stage. But if it had office approval only at the provisional stage, it will need board approval for the final stage. Every license has to go before the board at least once at one point for their approval. Another big consideration for deciding that you want to purchase into a license. And again, I keep saying purchase into a license because it's important to note that licenses are not transferable. You can purchase ownership in the entity that holds the license, but that does not mean that you can just buy a license and transfer it to your own company. So, if you're purchasing into to a license, whether it's 100% or 2%, you need to be cognizant of your suitability as a purchaser. You'll need to submit fingerprints and have a background check done by the Office of Cannabis Management. There are certain disqualifying felonies and other convictions that could play a part in your ability to be considered suitable to hold a license. Any involvement that the commission or the office finds on your involvement in the illicit market could impact your suitability to purchase a license. Any out-of-state licenses you might have also impact your ability to hold a license in New York. There are restrictions with your out-of-state licenses and in-state licenses. And then suitability of the seller, you want to make sure, again, are they provisionally approved? Are they not? Do they hold other licenses under this same company that you're trying to purchase into? And how would that look and work? You want to know the standing of the license at that point in time. Making sure that there's nothing that has been going on in the background that could hang up further approvals that might be needed by the office. And if they have any other applications that might be pending with that same entity, just a whole bunch of things that really need to be considered when you're making this step. Next slide. I think I'm turning it over to Patricia for these approvals.
Thanks, Danielle. So for required approvals, you want to think about if you're on the purchasing end, what approvals might still be required before. Which approvals would you like to still be obtained before you actually enter into a transaction? Or are you okay entering into a transaction and having those approvals take place once you're part of that business? And so some of those approvals, Danielle already touched upon them, are location approval. Do you have a location in mind, or does the business already have one? And at what stage is it? Has it been approved? Is there proximity protection, right? And therefore it has proximity protection. Is it still being reviewed? What is the status of the notice to the municipality that's required to be given? Was it given appropriately? Was there a public convenience and advantage exception filed, requested? And if so, when was it requested? What's the status of such a request? We also, Danielle touched on the provisional versus final, and what's still needed, what's still outstanding to obtain the final license. And has there been any issues with obtaining such approvals along the way to obtaining the final license? Jay, we can move to the next one. Ownership and control. We could do a whole series, not even just one webinar on this. We could just do a whole series on ownership and control. So I'm just going to give a very broad overview of this with respect to the considerations from a purchaser's perspective. What is your intent? Do you want to operate a business at the end of the day, or do you want to maybe just participate in the business, maybe purchase certain amount of interest in the entity, learn about it, learn how to operate? Or do you want to just invest maybe and sit on the sidelines and potentially be subject to a lot less regulatory filings, right? So it's all about what is your plan ultimately, and thinking about what does that plan look like? How long are you willing to wait until the office and the board has the process in place for considering and approving changes of majority of ownership and control? And if it's not going to occur on your expected timeline, but gets extended, do you have that built into your business plan? And does it fit into there? Or are you on a truncated time frame? Both from the seller and buyer's perspective. Jay, next one. The counterparty relationship, right? And this applies to any sale, purchase of any business, right? Cannabis industry, any industry. Right? There's a period of time where when you're purchasing a business, you need the counterparty involved, right? From a purchaser standpoint, you would need the seller involved for a period of time to ensure, especially if there's regulatory approvals, to ensure that there's coordination and working together to obtain regulatory approvals. But even from the perspective of practical know-how, you may need the seller to stick around for a while, right? To show you the books and records, walk you through the operational issues. And so how long are you going to ask them to stick around, right? And on the flip side, from the seller's perspective, how quickly do you want to get out of this? If you've had enough and you're looking to exit the market, what's your appetite with regard to staying in the picture to help the purchaser make sure that the business is running smoothly? We could go to the next one. On the payment terms, again, just like any other purchase sale transaction, you want to think about from either perspective, again, from either end, right? What's your expectation on payment? Are you going to require it at day one? Are you going to require a certain amount on signing? The remainder may be at closing, or earned out over time, maybe earned out based on certain triggers. What are those triggers going to be? Is it going to be certain milestones? Will you be using an escrow? What are the issues involved in an escrow if it's not one of the parties to the arrangement? Do you have an idea of an escrow agreement? So with regard to payment terms, just like a number of these considerations, of course, it's a negotiation, but you need to think about some of these items so that when you start talking to the counterparty, and again, oftentimes you may change your mind or move a little bit off your benchmark, but you want to think about what your position is on each of these before you head into such discussions, before you start heading down that road. And so we're going to turn it over to Ben for, of course, the most important part of this, which is the corporate considerations.
Thank you very much, Patricia and Danielle. I'm going to take you off stage, but thank you so much. And I linked to how to get in touch with both of them in the chat, whether you're on LinkedIn or whether you're on YouTube. So thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Patricia. And we will see you at the next webinar, number 3. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
It is now my pleasure to welcome up Ben Farber. Ben is also a partner at Hodgson Russ and has over 20 years of experience advising an array of clients on corporate transactions and other matters, including privately held businesses, publicly listed companies, private fund managers and independent sponsors, and real estate developers, startup companies, and high net worth individual investors. And as we know, cannabis isn't just any other business or sector, as there are unique considerations on this front. So Ben, I'm going to bring you up and also bring the presentation up. Thank you for being here.
Preceding me, to Patricia and Danielle and to Joe. And I appreciate that this is the most important part, but I think Patricia and Danielle, all those regulatory considerations that you provide, very important. But then there's also obviously the nuts and bolts in terms of implementing this and getting the deal done. And as somebody who's had a lot of experience doing deals and in the startup space, there's a lot of issues or parallels between and then I think Patricia mentioned this in her prior presentation about some concepts or ideas that are just part of deals. And then there's obviously the regulatory overlay as it relates to cannabis, which is extensive, as evidenced by all the description that you got from Danielle and from Patricia. So, I mean, just at a high level, we have the federal law challenges, associated with cannabis. And then there's the highly regulated aspect of it in New York State. And then on top of it, there's just the nascent state of New York cannabis and the infrastructure still being rolled out and built upon, and most notably in connection with change of control transactions and just building out the infrastructure as it relates to approval and the like. And that's still a little bit to come. And so that's kind of changed the landscape as far as how the structure of these sorts of transactions are happening in the interim. Obviously, as time progresses, that's going to change, but it's taking more of the form of a bifurcated or two-step transaction in the near term to handle things as OCM is sort of building the plane while flying it, if you will. And Jay, you can switch to the next slide if you could. So I at a high level, I mean, I know most people here are talking about or are here for, description or explanation as it relates to purchasing an entity that holds a license. But there may be other, there's current license holders as well, and for them, there's an element of what I'm going to be touching upon that kind of specifically relates to them, and that is the raising of capital and the like. And there's different sort of elements or different ways of raising capital for cannabis entities. And then, but if you're looking to acquire a license, and again, as Danielle had pointed out in the prior segment, you're not buying the license itself, you're buying an entity that holds the license because the license itself isn't transferable. There's really, 3 steps to that process. And some of it you may have already done, but possibly not. And that is 1, forming an entity. 2, there may be the element of raising capital. You may have the capital all on hand already, in which case you don't have to really deal with that all that much. And then the third is negotiating the actual purchase and sale transaction with your counterparty, as Patricia and Danielle had alluded to in the prior segment. So the first part, forming an entity. I mean, there's different types of entities, and I'm sure people are aware of those. And generally, it's corporation, partnership, or limited partnership, and limited liability company. Most times in this market or in this space, it seems that limited liability companies seem to be the entity of choice. So, you'll probably want to talk to your attorney and an accountant in terms of coming up with what is the appropriate entity for you. But more often than not, it seems that limited liability companies is the entity of choice in both. And when we're talking about this, you're forming sort of a holding company, and then using that as the basis or the vehicle by which you're going to acquire the equity of this operating company, the company that holds the license. All right. So let's just talk a little bit about raising capital. And it basically, there's 2 basic categories, if you will. There's equity or debt. And with debt, that's obviously a loan, and I'm sure people are very familiar with that. I think, one of the considerations in the regulatory environment that we're talking about it as it relates to cannabis and what Patricia was referencing earlier is how much disclosure as it relates to some of the investors that are going to be involved. And it's all dependent upon their the level of involvement. And with lenders, perhaps less of an involvement, less disclosure as it relates to those folks. The challenge is obviously going to be are you going to get terms that are going to be favorable to you as the operator, and that it makes sense in terms of your larger business plan in terms of obtaining the loan on the terms that are being offered to you by prospective lenders. The second bucket is equity, and that would take the form of typically, if we're talking about LLCs, membership interests in an LLC, and that would be customized based on the type of offering that you want to do of these LLC interests. And the good thing about LLCs is that they're very malleable, very flexible in terms of the terms associated with voting and economic rights. So that would be a collaborative effort between you and your prospective investors to figure out what's going to make sense in terms of the type of rights that they're going to have versus you as the operator, and what do the economics look like in terms of their participation and where they are. And to the extent that they're providing the bulk of the capital, it may be the case where they're taking priority relative to you in terms of getting paid out or getting a return on whatever this investment looks like. And then the third option is kind of a hybrid. It's convertible debt. So the idea is that perhaps people are getting into the space initially more conservatively. They want to make a loan, but over time they might want to convert that loan into equity. And there may be triggers or options on the part of both the issuer of the debt, which is going to be you as the holding company, or as the holder of the debt, the lender, to convert that into equity. And that could be for a variety of different reasons or a variety of different conditions as the basis of the trigger for converting. All right. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So that's, and when I talked about it, we have the holdco and talking about capitalizing the hold, first selecting the type of entity for your holding company, then capitalizing that in terms of raising the money necessary to actually buy the interest. the third step is engaging in that negotiation, buying the interest in the entity that holds the license. And so now you're done with holdco for the most part, and now you're dealing with opco, the operating company, and negotiating that purchase and sale. And this is where that regulatory wrinkle comes into play right now, and that currently OCM is not accepting change of control transactions. And to the extent that you're looking to buy the whole, all of the interests of the entity which holds the license, that would be a change of control transaction. So currently, a lot of folks are structuring these as two-step transactions, where the buyer is buying something less than 50% of the interest in the entity. And then when they are in a position where they can submit the request for a change of control and have that approved by OCM, at that point in time, that would prompt or trigger the acquisition of the second 50%. So there's going to be this interim period, the way that these transactions are currently structured, where you're operating alongside the seller, and that presents its own challenges in terms of getting to know the seller up front and understanding that there's going to be this period of time, trying to get the desired economics while staying true to what the regulatory requirements are, is that you're not controlling the entity, at least initially, and trying to make that all work in the interim until OCM has their infrastructure up and running to make that happen. So with that's kind of in a nutshell, sort of some of the considerations associated with these sorts of transactions. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jay.
Mute. What I said, beautiful things about Ben and Patricia and Danielle and Joe. I wanted to thank them and their teams at Modern Advocacy and Hodgson Russ for their partnership and their efforts to get this together and spread the word and to share their expertise. So thank you again, Patricia, Danielle, Ben, and Joe. We will do this again for our third installation of a similar topic, but every time it seems dynamic because the industry is changing so rapidly, especially in New York. So thank you all, Modern Advocacy and the Hodgson Russ team, for joining us here today. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn. Many of you already are. Be sure to follow us on YouTube. Make sure to get our inbox newsletter every single day at cultivated.news. We will check in with everybody soon. And again, thanks everybody for joining.